All right, I'd like to start off by thanking you and everyone involved for having me on to speak this afternoon or this evening. And I'm just going to kind of give you guys a quick, Heidi, how do I get to my slides here?
You should have your slides down there at the bottom. Do you see the little arrows to the left and
Oh,
right?
okay, it said tap to view. Okay, I got it now. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to start off with, I'll give you kind of a style overview on how I'm going to do this. I'm basically just going to kind of tell you guys the story of my life and how I came to the conclusion on what I wanted to do and the steps that it took for me to get to the position of airline pilot for Southwest Airlines, kind of where I started and what my thought process was, and how I used that process to take the steps necessary to become qualified to be a pilot. The first slide is aviation as a career. Aviation is just that. It is a career. I always looked at it like pilot, mechanic, dispatcher, flight attendant. There's ramp people. There's and that's just in the airline business. That there are several jobs, a lot of jobs that are affiliated with the career that is aviation. So aviation as a career has a lot of facets to it. I personally can speak to a couple from firsthand experience. I started my aviation career off as a mechanic and moved towards being a pilot. But just to give you a little background information on how long that's been my career, when I was 16 or 17 years old, I worked for, I think it was called Ogden Allied. But basically what it was I was a sky cap. I would check the bags actually I was a sky cap helper. I would help the sky caps check the bags, and I had the task of taking the bags from where they were checked and throw them on the conveyor belt and watch the sky cap get the tip while I was lugging the bags around. So that was my first introduction into aviation as a career, but I just thought it was neat being at the airport. I've always enjoyed that. So I think we also have to relate what we want to do as a career. We have to relate it to what our passion is. And if you can do what you're passionate about, or be in an industry that you're passionate about, then it just makes all the other pieces fit together so much better. And that's the beauty of aviation as a career, is you're not obligated to just be in a fueler or a mechanic or a pilot or a flight attendant or a dispatcher or a ticket agent or a vice president or CEO or a chief financial officer, or whatever it is. You can kind of get in the career and see where you're best fitted as long as you have the passion for aviation, which I did. I started off as a skycap helper, and then I went to school to be a mechanic. And then after I was a mechanic, I thought, well, man, the pilots look like they're having a good time up there. I'm out here in the rain, and they're in there and drinking coffee. I think I want to try that. So the latitude of moving around within a career is part of what makes it, I don't know, makes it adventurous. It helps you find out what your true passion is that you can kind of narrow down. So I'll just kind of give you a little background here about me. I guess when I first started college, when I was a freshman, I went to Prairie View A&M for a semester, and I was really trying to figure out why I was there. I was basically there because my parents told me that I was going to go to college when I got out of high school, but I really had no direction on what it is that I truly wanted to do. So I would always kind of lean towards things that sounded good. Well, I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be an accountant, or all the stuff that I saw that people looked at as successful people. But the reality of it is it wasn't my passion. It wasn't what I was into, and I didn't excel at it because I was going down a road that wasn't what God had planned for me to do ultimately. So what I did was, at some point from switching major to major, I ran into a friend of mine, and he and I, when we were in high school, we used to work on our cars together and hang out and tinker with things. And he told me that he was going to go to TCC, which is Tarrant County College over in Fort Worth, and he said he was going to go to a 2-year program, and it was going to teach him how to be an aviation mechanic. And I thought, man, I really enjoy fixing things, and the idea of fixing an airplane just sounded really exciting to me. And that motivated me to want to do the same thing, which kind of brings up another point. It's important to be around people who are positive influences for you, because when you're around people who are doing things, when you put yourself in that environment, you get exposed to things that you hadn't even thought about before. Ironically, my father was an aircraft mechanic in the military, but I had never even for a second considered that as a career. So after he said he was going to go to TCC, I explored it, and I said, you know, I think I'm going to do that too. So I started that class. It was a 2-year program. The first year was airframe. Airframe relates to the actual structure of the airplane, the wings, the tail, the fuselage, and learning how to replace sheet metal and repair sheet metal and those types of things. And I'm just giving you a real basic overview. It gets a little bit more technical than that. And then the second year is power plant, where you learn how the engine works, how to fix the engine, and all the skills that it takes to do that. Both of the airframe license and the power plant license are required licenses to be a mechanic at, well, not only just airlines, but even if you're going to work on a small airplane, you have to be licensed to do it. We're regulated by the federal government. And of course, they want people who are trained and licensed to work on aircraft. And it's regulated by the government, obviously. So I went through that program. I took my federal test, which you take a written test and then you take a practical test. The written test is what it sounds like. You just go in and you're prepared for it the whole semester long. You're preparing for these tests, and then you take the test, and then after the test is over, you take what's called a practical exam, where you actually go out to an aircraft, and they give you a scenario on something that isn't working right or broken, and you basically show that you have the skill to, if not fix it, or I should say not only fix it, but to research it, find out the proper methods to fix it, and then show that you have the expertise to fix it. And after I graduated from that program, I got an Associates of Aviation Maintenance Technology. And Delta Airlines would actually take the students from TCC and take their applications, and some would get interviews. I, fortunately, was one of 2 that was afforded an interview. So they flew us out to Atlanta, Georgia, and we had interviews, and I was called back for a second interview. Long story short, I got the job. I was fortunate enough to start in Dallas, which is unheard of for Delta Airlines, because almost everybody starts in Atlanta, and they just happen to have some positions open at DFW. And when I started there, and actually for me it was exciting. It goes back to whether or not you're passionate about what your career is. It was exciting for me just to even be close to the airplanes and touch them and get to work on them. Boy, that was a whole nother level, so it was really exciting to me. So I started there and worked there for 3.5 years, and I was furloughed. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I don't want to put myself in this situation again. I want to have a backup plan. So from there I went into sales, and I realized that wasn't for me. It was a desk job, and I'm not a desk kind of guy. I'm more of a hands-on kind of guy that enjoys, being out and about and doing things. And so the interest just wasn't there for me. Back to the word passion. The passion wasn't there for me. It's not really what I wanted to do. So fortunately for me, Southwest Airlines was looking for mechanics, and I realized there was only one thing that I was really good at doing as far as value for a company that would be something that I had a unique skill at. I had a license, 2 licenses to work on them, so I applied at Southwest Airlines, and fortunately I got an interview, couple of interviews and got hired. So that is kind of how I picked aviation as a career. Interestingly enough, as I look back in retrospect, I remember as a kid I used to always be fascinated with airplanes, and there was just something about that. We'd pass by an airport, and I'd always just love to see the landing lights, and man, maybe if I got a glimpse of one taking off or landing, that was a big deal to me. And I think that's kind of what started me down the road of it actually being a passion. Well, as I told you before, the reason why I went into the mechanic thing was I was kind of spinning and didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. And I really enjoyed the mechanic thing. And, you know, we have these epiphanies in life. And one of my epiphanies was I was working on an airplane one day, and I was working with a gentleman. He was probably, I don't know, 60 years old. And he was climbing under an engine. And I was like, you know, this job is fun for me as a young man, but I don't know how, if I'm going to be as spry as this guy when I get older, that I can climb under engines and work on airplanes and stuff. I need to get back to thinking what it is I'm going to ultimately do. And I'm in an airplane environment at Southwest, and I see airplanes coming and going, and the pilot's up there, like I told you before, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to pursue that. So I asked a pilot, and I was like, how does one go about becoming a pilot? And all I ever knew about was the military route, which I can't really speak much to, but typically it involves either being an ROTC or going straight from college to an officer cadet training course, or if you can go to the Air Guard, that's another way to do it, and they pay for your training and you get military training, military experience. All really good things. But I couldn't do that because I didn't have 20/20 vision, and at the time you had to have 20/20 in order to be a military pilot. Now they have some provisions where they'll actually give you LASIK and have waivers, and all that depends on how bad they need pilots as well. And at the time when I was looking, there was no shortage of pilots, which is interesting now because of any of you that are considering being a pilot in particular. There is and is about to be more of a pilot shortage in America. And, well, I say America, actually in the world. We've got China that's coming up, and the Korean airlines, and all the airlines that are looking for pilots are starting to hire some of the American pilots away from the American carriers. And it's actually to a point now where it's getting really competitive for the airlines to try and find qualified people. And that's kind of how I started down the road of being a pilot. And after I talked to one pilot in particular and several after, and realized that the civilian route was the way I was going to go, which at the time I started at Mountain View College, and I looked it up right before the webinar started, and they still have their professional pilot program, which worked out well for me. And from what I understand is you guys have some of that stuff available to you at your current level, which is even better, because as we'll talk about later, everything as far as pilot that's pilot education and pilot qualifications has to do with experience. So the experience that you have as a pilot is what makes you valuable, which is similar to my situation as a mechanic. At the time when I got hired at Southwest as a mechanic, you had to have 3 years of experience working on Boeing airplanes. Well, Delta Airlines afforded me that experience to work on the airplanes, which eventually got me a job at Southwest that I normally wouldn't have gotten. So that's just kind of a little insight into how that works. So I wanted to give you a little background on the steps that I took personally to pursue my adventure, I guess you could say, as being a pilot. So the educational requirements. Educational requirements are really kind of interesting with being a pilot, and the reason why is because being a pilot, like to be a qualified applicant at Southwest Airlines, you have to have all of your ratings. Okay, and your ratings are different levels of licenses. So you have the way it starts, and you don't have to have this to be an airline pilot, but it's kind of how you go down the road. You get your private license, which is basically learning how to basically fly an airplane. And then you get your instrument rating, which is what you learn to fly by instruments, so you can fly in clouds and understand your instruments, which is what we basically do on a daily basis as airline pilots. And then you get your commercial license, which now with a commercial license, you're able to be hired, so you're able to be paid to fly an airplane. And then eventually your multi-engine rating, which means you can fly an airplane with more than one engine. And then ultimately an ATP, which is an airline transport pilot. In order to be an airline transport pilot, you have to have 1,500 hours of flying experience. Now, backing up a little bit, the private, you have to have 40 hours in one program, 60 in another. The instrument rating is based on proficiency. I'm not sure if there's a hourly requirement for that one. And the multi-engine, the commercial rating, you have to have, I believe it's 250 hours. I'm sorry, it's been a long time since I had to do that stuff, but the ATP is 1,500 hours. And the ATP, the professional, but basically it's the doctorate degree of pilots. So it's what qualifies you to have 170 people sitting behind you and you be competent enough and have the skill level and the experience to safely get them to their destination. As far as the college pathway and the military pathway, we kind of touched on that, but there are colleges that have specific programs that are geared towards being a pilot. I personally think that the best way to go is to probably start at a community college. And the reason why I say that is because I've been researching this a little bit, because my son, he's 17, he's a senior this year in high school, and he wants to pursue being an airline pilot, and we've looked at the best way for him to do it, and the best way for him right now is to go to a community college, start there, and basically how their programs work is you will get your, as we discussed, your private, your instrument, your multi, and your commercial like we talked about, but also you'll get your instructor's ratings. So you'll get what's called a CFI, Certified Flight Instructor, and a CFII, which is a Certified Flight Instrument Instructor. And what you do with those ratings is, in order to build the time to get to your 250 that we talked about and to your 1,500 hours for your ATP, how you get that time, you know, because right at that point you're kind of at a catch-22, because you have the ratings, but you don't have a job because you're not qualified for a job. Well, how do you get qualified for a job? Well, you have to have more time. Well, how can I get more time if I don't have a job? So basically how the industry works is you become a certified flight instructor, and you actually instruct primary students. You instruct the new guys and girls that are on the property, and you teach them to get their private license and their instrument license, and at the same time you're logging that as commercial time, because that's time that you can use towards your own experience, and it's also time that they can use towards their experience. So typically that's what civilian pilots do to build time so they can get to a position where they're hireable by a commuter airline. The military pathway typically involves the college pathway, and then you go into the military, or you go to a military academy like the Air Force Academy and get a pilot slot going in there. And all of that's based on performance in college, on what airplane you're going to fly, and where your assignments are. And hopefully you do get to fly an airplane, because I've been hearing lately that some of those guys and girls are getting drones for a while. So that's something you kind of want to be careful about, because you know, flying a drone, actually, to me it sounds like a lot of fun, but the reality of it is when you go and you get out of the military and they go and you apply to Southwest or American, United, or wherever, and they go, okay, yeah, how much experience do you have? Well, I've got 1,400 hours, but through 200 hours of it's in drones. Well, you know, they're obviously not going to take that time, and sometimes they will or will not take helicopter time too, depending on the airline. They may take a certain amount of it or none of it at all. So that's basically the civilian pathway. Either one of these can be you may or may you actually technically don't even have to go to college to get your ratings. It's just the ratings are separate from college. So don't misinterpret that you have to go to college to get your ratings. You don't. However, you want to make yourself as competitive as possible. And obviously, when it comes time to get a job, if I've got two guys or two ladies with the same exact qualifications, but one has a degree and the other one doesn't, then guess who's probably going to get the job? So is it necessary? No, but does it help you and make you more competitive? Absolutely. As far as personal skills go, basically it's a job for people who you have to be prepared. You know, it's a really interesting thing because at any point you may have to, you may be cruising at altitude for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and absolutely nothing happens, and you're looking out the window and daydreaming and talking to the person next to you and having a great time, drinking a soda, eating a sandwich. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you've got to go from chilling, doing nothing, to your A game immediately. And it takes the type of person who can do that. That's one of the personal skills, and it also takes a person who can prepare and look ahead and see things coming. And it takes a person who likes to be outside. I mean, there are times where we're flying in rain and we're flying in snow, and we're in, like right now I'm in New York City, and I live in Fort Worth, and there's times where you're not with your family, and I'll be away from my family for 4 days this week, but on a typical schedule I'm away 3 days a week, and so that means 2 nights away from home. So I work 3 days and I'm off for 2 nights typically. So I'll work 3 days and I'm off for 4 days. And then I'll work 3 days and I'm off for 4 days. So I like that personally because that gives me 4 days at home to get everything done I need to get done. Not to mention when I get home on the third day, I'm home probably about 2 o'clock. So I really got most of that day too if I need to get stuff done. Anyway, I'm kind of on a tangent now, but I just kind of wanted to give you a glimpse into how my week typically goes. And then we've discussed the professional requirements as far as licensing goes and stuff like that, and the hours needed to maintain really basically competitiveness with the profession. Let's see, opportunities. Now this one is near and dear to my heart right now because, and I was just talking to the captain I'm flying with. We went down to dinner a little while ago, and I was telling him about this presentation. And he and I, we were just so excited for you guys because this is such a wonderful time to get involved with the aviation business. Anytime you are pursuing a profession that is in a critical stage that they can't find enough qualified people, you're already ahead of the game before you ever start. So to be in a situation where the company needs you as much as you need them is a very powerful and wonderful place to be. Okay, so the opportunities you can. What I did was I used to fly corporate jets. I'd fly the Gulfstreams and the planes that the rich and famous and the CEOs, and I've flown quite a few stars, and I flew Whitney Houston. I've flown well, I could go on and on, but that's what we call the private sector. That's flying the private jets, and you may or may not want to do that. You may want to go into the airline business. You may want to, I don't know, you may want to go into the instructing business. We have flight safety where you could just basically teach people how to fly, and that could be your whole career. You may want to go the military route, which is a wonderful way to go. It's a service to our company. To our country, and you could have your own charter company. You can do charter flying. You can do we could go on and on about the professions in aviation. And DFW is a wonderful place to do it because there is a lot of aviation at DFW. A lot of people move to DFW when they're interested in aviation because there are so many opportunities. See, the military contractors, I can't really speak to that, but that's basically what I know about that. And my advice to you is, if it is a passion of yours or something that you're at least willing to explore, please do. It's worked out real well for me. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. I just now figured out how to look at the, I wasn't paying attention to the chats going on the side. So I'm trying to catch up here.
That's okay. I think a lot of the
yeah.
questions they were asking were about this trip.
Okay. Oh, okay. Let me see here. Okay. We're to questions anyway. Okay. Okay. Let me try and hang on a second here. Let me get that page back up. 1 second.
So students, we have some students with us tonight. The first questions that you'll ask will be for Mr. Jackson, and then we'll switch over to the Houston trip.
Okay, so are you want? Should I read these off of here?
Well, there was a question here that said, "Do you still fly planes?" And I think you answered that.
Okay.
And then
I do. You know what? I'm sorry. Another interesting story too is, you think about all these wonderful places like New York City. Well, for me, the first time I ever laid eyes on New York City, I was flying a jet here and getting paid to do it. So that's something that I think is pretty neat. I've been all over the world. I've been to all over the Caribbean, Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, Jamaica, all those St. Martin, St. Thomas, St. Croix. I've been to all those places flying jets that, it's fun when you go on vacation for a week and somebody else is paying for it. So that was in my corporate world that I was on that. I'm confused, so I'm here for Houston College tour.
Let's scroll down to the bottom. There's a question that's asking if you recommend trade schools for this field.
I'm sorry, I missed that. There's a recommending what?
Trade schools.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can't tell you how much I recommend them. That got me where I am in my career, is trade schools. If I would have stuck with just going to college and basically majoring in whatever I decided I was going to major in, I never would have found my true passion. So I think that, I think that a lot of times we get misguided and misled into thinking that we need to go to college like a typical four-year university. And like I said, when my parents expected me to do it, but when I got there, I really didn't know why I was there. So you got to figure out what it is, what your passion is, and then pursue it in whatever way is the best way. You got to kind of be flexible on that.
Okay, there's another question here. Do pilots usually start off in the smaller planes?
Yes, typically you do, and that kind of goes back to what I was talking about. But this, and that's from Tamika Jackson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, Tamika, it's evolving so fast that who knows? By the time you guys get qualified, you may be in a small plane for a little while, but yeah, typically the small plane is where you get your experience from, and then you move up to bigger planes if you want to. I mean, if you want to stay in a smaller plane, if you enjoy flying those more, then you're welcome to do it. But typically how it works, how the hierarchy works, is the bigger the plane, the bigger the paycheck. So you want to go up to, if you're using it as a career, then you want to fly a bigger airplane than, because it basically, in the airline business now I'm talking about in particular. Now, if you want to fly corporate jets, then that's a whole nother story. If you get the right job there, you may not ever want to fly anything bigger. But typically, like the Gulfstreams, which like the movie stars and the billionaires and so forth fly around in, that they're not that big. They typically hold 12 people, 12 to 14 people, but we're talking about big lazy boy type chairs with the flat screen TVs and all that kind of stuff. But it just depends on where you want to be, you know. And I love this question Chastity asked, when you first started, were you scared? I got a story about that. Yes, I was, to answer the question. The first time, after you take about 4 or 5 lessons, 6, 7 lessons, you do what's called a solo, which is when you're no longer in the airplane with your instructor. And I was a little scared when I was with my instructor, but I started feeling more comfortable. And the first time that I flew an airplane by myself was in Denton, Texas. It was about, I don't know, probably 100 degrees. I was taxiing out to the runway. There were 2 planes that were about to land, and by about to land, they were probably I probably would just take off now, but I was scared to do it at the time. I figured I'd let them get out of the way. I'm sweating like crazy. I'm scared to open the window because I don't want to forget to leave it open when I take off, and so I was a mess. Excuse me, but the more you do it, just like anything, just like you were scared the first day you went to school at the school you're at now, it just, the more you go and the more you get used to it, the more comfortable you get used to it. Let's see. No, that Tamika's asking about the international flights. No, that once you get to the airlines, or really once you get to anywhere, wherever they need you to fly to, they expect you to fly there. International flights, sometimes at Southwest Airlines, international flights, everything in the, let me preface it by saying this, everything in the airline industry is done by seniority. So if it's an international flight and you're going to, let's say, Aruba, and when you get there, you've got 23 hours and the hotel's on the beach, then you can imagine that's going to go to somebody, typically to a person with a lot of seniority because it's a great trip. But that same trip, and you're only there for, 10 hours, may go to somebody that's junior. So it has nothing to do with the distance that you go. Typically, people bid trips for days off. Actually, that's the number one reason. Days off pay, and then sometimes the overnights. Like, right now I'm in New York City, but it's wintertime, and it's misty and rainy, so we bid a month in advance, but you can imagine that if somebody's been here, 30 years, they won't be on this trip. My most recent flight, like today, for example, I went from, and this is how my day started. I drove to the airport from Fort Worth. I flew from Dallas to Houston, sat there for about 45 minutes, flew back to Dallas, sat there for 45 minutes, then flew to New York. That was my whole day. Tomorrow I end up in Fort Lauderdale. I think we fly 3 legs. I end up in Fort Lauderdale. The day after that, I'll be in Seattle, and then the day after that, I'm back home. So that's kind of typically how it goes. Chassie, where did you see me flying today?
Out her classroom window.
Oh, okay. May have. May have. Hey, and another thing too that about the criminal justice. Criminal justice. There's also aviation involved with criminal justice. A good friend of mine, he flies for the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And they also have the helicopter pilots that fly for the police department. So aviation touches a lot of different fields. I think that there's probably not more female pilots because I don't think that females have, it's not a field that females have typically pursued, but I see that that's changing now. There's an organization called Women in Aviation. And if you're interested in it, if you'll search Women in Aviation, they do a lot to help females get acclimated and involved with flying. And I actually went to one of their conventions in Tennessee. A female captain friend of mine invited me, and it was the what's it called, the Gaylord. And it was full of female pilots. So there's probably a lot more than you realize, but you're right. I mean, compared to their male counterparts, there aren't that many. But in reality, there's thousands of them. I've flown with several probably in the last few months. so that they're not as prevalent as male pilots, but they're definitely a contingent of people. Another thing too about being scared to fly is, and I know we're a little bit off the career thing this way, but one of the reasons why people typically are scared to fly is because they don't understand how an airplane works, which makes perfect sense to me. If you're going to get in a metal tube and somebody tells you you're going to be in New York in 2 hours, but nobody explains to you how it's going to work and why it's staying in the air, I mean, it's a scary thought. I mean, for anybody, including me. But that goes back to education, and once you understand airplanes and you understand the science behind it and you understand how they work, it's just like a car, you know. You kind of understand how a car works before you ever try and drive one or get in one. So it's you feel more comfortable about flying in something that you understand. Somebody wants me to talk about salaries, and that's a real difficult question because now we really are getting into size of airplanes. Airline pilots fall into two categories. You got captains and you got first officers. I'm a first officer or co-pilot. Co-pilots typically make 30% less than a captain makes. And the only difference between a captain and a first officer is seniority. So as your seniority gets higher, then you are promoted to captain. And basically, if you think about it, if you got 1,000 pilots, 500 of them will be captains, and 500 of them will be first officers. You can't have 1,000 captains because then there's nobody that's going to fly on the other side. So it's a difficult question, but I'll put it to you. Do a little research, do a little Google search about airline captains and what they make, and typically those what you'll see is a little bit conservative. But we all call it the best part-time job you'll ever have. So typically, I think I kind of went over the schedule thing. Typically, you'll fly like 3 or 4 legs a day, and for 3 days or either 4 days, and then take the rest of it off. And yes, it is true that if you think about this, the question is it true that flying is safer than driving or riding a train or bus? And it's absolutely true, because if you think about, you hear about a car accident in Dallas-Fort Worth every single morning, and that's just in one little DFW, not even the state of Texas, just in DFW. If you think about that in the whole state of Texas, and then if you think about that in every state in the United States, it kind of gives it some perspective. The only aviation careers I can really speak to, Bonnie, are pilots and mechanics and what I've done. I wish I could give you some more insight on everything else, but some of it's just going to take a little bit of research on what you're interested in, and there's always going to be somebody that can help you out. Another thing too that I wanted to tell you guys is, if you have a passion and a goal you're pursuing, tell everybody you know, everybody you meet that'll give you 5 seconds to talk about it. Let them know what you want to do. That way, you never know who you're going to run into or who may be able to help you or give you a little bit of information, and help you along the way. And yes, Sherry Crockett's asking about the physical exam to be a pilot. What we do is we take a physical every year. Some of that's kind of changing now. The FAA is changing some of the things, but basically once a year you go and get a medical, what we call a medical, which is a basic physical. It just says that they check your eyes, they give you an EKG to check your heart. It's just basic sight and weight and stuff like that, but it's not a horrible or horribly invasive physical. It's just really super basic. They'll check your you don't really do blood work, but they check you for anything that may be what can I say, that may be a threat to your physical ability to fly an airplane with hundreds of people behind you. Bonnie's a former air traffic control. That's great. I can't. I'm reading Bonnie Fisher's thing. Is she trying to get her son into flying or into air traffic control?
it looks like air traffic control. And Bonnie, I think next month we have a representative from Latino University. I think that's going to be a good one for you to talk to him because they cover all the careers from being a pilot to air traffic control to mechanics, and I think he'd be a good person for you to talk to.
Yeah, yeah, the thing with the Aaliyah, that was a there's a whole story behind that. You might want to research. That's interesting. But yeah, I don't know if let me look at my. I guess I'll conclude with the fact that the best reason to do anything will be chase your passion, chase what you're passionate about, because you don't want to get to decide you want to do something for the money or for the prestige or whatever, and you get there and you spend all these years becoming an expert at it, and then you realize that you don't enjoy doing it. There's no worse, or there's not a worse feeling in the world, and take it from somebody who knows, than to drive to work and hate the thought of what you're going to be doing for the next 8 to 10 hours. So you got to think about what makes you happy, what's a good fit for you. And for me, I feel blessed to be able to be a pilot because it's a perfect fit for me. And from my kids' perspective, my son obviously loves it because he wants to do it for a living as well. So it's important that you do what's best for you. And aviation's a wonderful field, and there's a lot of things that you can do, and some of the things that you guys have asked about that I can't help you with. I encourage you, as far as air traffic control or even being a flight attendant, they make a wonderful living, and they have a great schedule and a lot of flexibility. And there's rampers, the guys that load the bags. There's people that you get the tickets. There's IT people that work over in the headquarters. We've got flight instructors. We've got guys that fix airplanes. We got guys that fix simulators. It's an unlimited, everything you can think of we have in aviation. But we don't want to have to get into a field that we're not happy in, I guess is what I really want to stress to you. And when you find your passion, you'll find that you're motivated to be the best at. You're designed as a human being to be good at something. We're not all good at the same things. But what you can't do, that's why I wanted to say that I was scared when I first started flying too, because you can't let fear ever get in the way of what you ultimately want to do. Because if it, the old saying, if it was easy, everybody would do it. That's so true. And sometimes if a lot of people never try or never chase their dreams because of fear. And if you let fear affect you in a negative way, you may not ever get to where you are supposed to be in life. So anyway, I'm going to close with that, I think, if there's no more questions.